back, and I just found out something. Chapter 30, which I'm about to start, is the last chapter. What? But then there's another Anne book, so don't despair. A wedding at the stone house. The last week in August came. Miss Lavender was to be married in it. 2 weeks later, Anne and Gilbert would leave for Redmond College. In a week's time, Mrs. Rachel Lynde would move to Green Gables and set up her layers and pennants in the erstwhile spare room, which was already prepared for her coming. She had sold all her superfluous household plenishings by auction and was at present reveling in the congenial occupation of helping the Allens pack up. Mr. Allen was to preach the farewell sermon the next Sunday. The old order was changing rapidly to give place to the new, as Anne felt with a little sad threading all her excitement and happiness. Changes ain't totally pleasant, but they're excellent things, said Mr. Harrison philosophically. 2 years is about long enough for things to stay exactly the same. If they'd stayed put any longer, they might grow mossy. Mr. Harrison was smoking on his veranda. His wife had self-sacrificingly told that he might smoke in the house if he took care to sit by an open window. Mr. Harrison rewarded this concession by going outdoors altogether to smoke in fine weather, and so mutual goodwill reigned. Anne had come over to ask Mrs. Harrison for some of her yellow dahlias. She and Diana were going through to Echo Lodge that evening to help Miss Lavender and Charlotta the Fourth with their final preparations for the morrow's bridal. Miss Lavender herself never had dahlias. She did not like them, and they would not have suited her fine retirement of her old-fashioned garden, but flowers of any kind were rather scarce in Avonlea and the neighboring districts that summer, thanks to Uncle Abe's storm, and Anne and Diana thought that a certain old cream-colored stone jug, usually kept sacred to doughnuts, brimmed over with yellow dahlias, it's hard for me to say, would be just the thing to set in a dim angle of the stone house stairs against the dark background of red hall paper. I suppose you'll be starting off for college in a fortnight's time, continued Mr. Harrison. Well, we're going to miss you an awful lot, Emily and me. To be sure, Mrs. Lynde be over there in your place. Ain't nobody but a substitute can be found for them. The irony of Mr. Harrison's tone is quite untransferable to paper. In spite of his wife's intimacy with Mrs. Lynde, the best that could be said of the relationship between her and Mr. Harrison, even under the new regime, was that they preserved an armed neutrality. Yes, I'm going, said Anne. I'm very glad with my head and very sorry with my heart. I suppose you'll be scooping up all the honors that are lying round loose at Redmond. I may try for one or two of those, confessed Anne, but I don't care so much for things like that as I did 2 years ago. What I did want to get out of my college course is some knowledge of the best way of living life and doing the most and best with it. I want to learn to understand and help other people and myself. Mr. Harrison nodded. That's the idea exactly. That's what college ought to be for, instead of for turning out a lot of BAs so chock full of book learning and vanity there ain't room for anything else. But you're right. College won't be able to do you much harm, I reckon. Diana and Anne drove over to Echo Lodge after tea, taking with them all the flowery spoil that several predatory expeditions in their own and their neighbors' gates had yielded. They found the old stone house agog with excitement. Charlotta the Fourth was flying around with such vim and briskness that her blue bows seemed really to possess the power of being everywhere at once. Like the helmet of Navarre, Charlotta's blue bows waved ever in the thickest of the fray. Making sure this is going. Praise be to goodness you've come, she said devoutly, for there's heaps of things to do, and the frosting on that cake won't harden, and there's all the silver to be rubbed up yet, and the horsehair trunk to be packed, and the roosters for the chicken salad are running out there beyant the hen house yet crowing, Miss Shirley, ma'am, and Miss Lavender ain't to be trusted to do a thing. I was thankful when Mr. Irving came in a few minutes ago and took her off for a walk in the woods. Courting's all right in the right place, Miss Shirley, ma'am, but if you try to mix it up with cooking and scouring and everything's spoiled, that's my opinion, Miss Shirley, ma'am. Anne and Diana worked so heartily that by 10 o'clock even Charlotta the Fourth was satisfied. She braided her hair in innumerable plaits and took her weary little bones off to bed. But I'm sure I shan't sleep a blessed wink, Miss Shirley, ma'am, for fear that something'll go wrong at the last minute. The cream won't whip, or Mr. Irving will have a stroke and not be able to come. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Let's see, where was I? And there's all the silver to be rubbed up yet, and the horsehair trunk to be packed, and the roosters for the chicken salad are running out there. Didn't I already read this? Oh, darn it, I did. Okay, wait a minute. Okay, Mr. Irving Stroke. He isn't in the habit of having strokes, is he? Asked Diana, the dimpled corners of her mouth twitching. To Diana, Charlotta the Fourth was, if not exactly a thing of beauty, certainly a joy forever. They're not things that go by habit, said Charlotta the Fourth with dignity. They just happen. And there you are. Anybody can have a stroke. You don't have to learn how. Mr. Irving looks a lot like an uncle of mine that had one once, just as he was sitting down to dinner one day. But maybe everything will go all right. In this world, you've just got to hope for the best and prepare for the worst and take whatever God sends. The only thing I'm worried about is that it won't be fine tomorrow, said Diana. Uncle Abe predicted rain for the middle of the week, and ever since the big storm came, I can't help believing there's a good deal in what Uncle Abe says. Anne, who knew better than Diana just how much Uncle Abe had to do with the storm, was not much perturbed by this. She slept the sleep of the just and weary and was roused in an earthly hour by Charlotta the Fourth. Oh, Miss Shirley, ma'am, it's awful to call you so early, came wailing through the keyhole, but there's so much to do yet. No, Miss Shirley, ma'am, I'm scared it's going to rain, and I wish you'd get up and tell me you think it ain't. Anne flew to the window, hoping against hope that Charlotta the Fourth was saying this merely by way of rousing her effectually, but alas, the morning did look unpropitious. Below the window, Miss Lavender's garden, which should have been a glory of pale virgin sunshine, lay dim and windless, and the sky over the firs was dark with moody clouds. Isn't it too mean? Said Diana. We must hope for the best, said Anne determinedly. If it only doesn't actually rain, a cool pearly gray like this would be really nicer than hot sunshine. But it will rain, warned Charlotta, creeping into the room. a figure of fun with her many braids wound around her head, the ends tied up with white thread sticking out in all directions. It'll hold off till the last minute, and then poor cats and dogs and all the folks will get sopping and track mud all over the house, and they won't be able to be married under the honeysuckle, and it's awful unlucky for no sun to shine on a bride. Say say what you will, Miss Shirley, ma'am. I knew things were going too well to last. Charlotta the Fourth seems certainly to have borrowed a leaf out of Miss Eliza Andrews' book. No, that's not a question. Out of her book. It did not rain, though it kept on looking as if it meant to. By noon, the rooms were decorated, the table beautifully laid, and upstairs was waiting a bride adorned for her husband. You do look sweet, said Anne rapturously. Lovely, echoed Diana. Everything's ready, Miss Shirley, ma'am, and nothing dreadful has happened yet, was Charlotta's cheerful statement as she betook herself to her little back room to dress. Out came all the braids. The resultant rampant crinkleness was plaited into 2 pigtails and tied, but not with 2 bows alone, but with 4 brand new ribbons, brightly blue. The 2 upper bows rather gave the impression of overgrown wings sprouting from Charlotta's neck, somewhere after the fashion of Raphael's cherubs. But Charlotta the Fourth thought them very beautiful, and although she had rustled into a white dress, so stiffly starched that it could not stand alone, she surveyed herself in her glass with great satisfaction, a satisfaction which lasted until she went out in the hall. All caught a glimpse through the spare room door, and a tall girl in some softly clinging gown, pinning white, starlight flowers on the smooth ripples of her ruddy hair. Oh, I'll never be able to look like Miss Shirley, thought poor Charlotta despairingly. You just have to be born so, I guess. Don't seem as if any amount of practice could give you that air. By 1 o'clock, the guests had come, including Mr. and Mrs. Allen, for Mr. Allen was to perform the ceremony in the absence of the Grafton minister on his vacation. There was no formality about the marriage. Miss Lavender came down the stairs to meet the bridegroom at the foot, and as he took her hand, she lifted her big brown eyes to his with a look that made Charlotta the Fourth, who entered, came down, and she took the hand, lifted her big brown to look at, felt queerer than ever. They went out to the honeysuckle arbor where Mr. Allen was awaiting them. The guests grouped themselves as they pleased. Anne and Diana stood by the old stone bench, with Charlotta the Fourth between them, desperately clutching their hands in her cold, tremulous little paws. Mr. Allen opened his blue book, and the ceremony proceeded. Just as Miss Lavender and Stephen Irving were pronounced,